Okay, so now everyone's been reminded one more time that this meeting is going to be recorded, and if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your video. I want to welcome everyone to the League of Women Voters and Sierra Club joint meeting on environmental pollutants versus human health, and the winner is. My name is Linda Smith, current chair of the Sierra Club-Loxahatchee group. We represent Palm Beach County, Martin County, Indian River, and Okeechobee counties. In a few days, we're going to have this recording up on our Sierra Club-Loxahatchee group YouTube. You may know about National Sierra Club as the oldest grassroots environmental organization in the United States. It was founded in 1892. Locally, we are all members of the Florida chapter. This is a list of some of our ambitious initiatives. And just a little, we're gonna be hearing about stopped sugar burning later on, so spoiler alert. I do invite everyone to please join us. We have a lot of work to do on all of these initiatives. Also, after the meeting, please go to our website and explore the wealth of information that's there. I'd like to direct you to the bottom of the home page where we have upcoming activities. This calendar lists all of our committee meetings, outings, cleanups, and they're all listed there on the website all the time. We have 7 different kayaking trips scheduled right now, so I'm sure if you go there, you will find something of interest. I would also like to invite everyone to our next general meeting, How to Build a Powerful Environmental Coalition of Voters. This may be of special interest to the League of Women Voters, I kind of think. So also at the end of this presentation, anyone who can, please stay for 5 minutes for some local environmental news. Without further ado, please mark your calendars for the March 24th meeting, How to Build Powerful Environmental Coalition of Voters. And I would like to introduce Kathy Gunlatch, President of the Palm Beach County League of Women Voters. Take it away, Kathy.
Thank you, Linda. We are excited to do this joint effort tonight with the Sierra Club. The League of Women Voters is a grassroots group also, and our mission is to empower voters and to defend democracy. And we've got a lot of work out there for us. If you've been keeping up with the Florida legislature, what's going on, it's somewhat heartbreaking at times. But we advocate for voters, we advocate for citizens, we work on various issues from education to gun safety to the environment. So we have a lot of things in common with you all. Linda did a good ad for the Sierra Club. And I want to say, look at our website. We would love you to join us. One of the things we are doing now in the state is we are suing the state over Senate Bill 90, which we feel really hurts voters. It changes vote by mail, access to drop boxes, all kinds of things. So that is what we do. We protect voting rights. So we register voters. If you're not registered, please register. And having said that, go to our website, join the league, become active. We really do a lot of great work. So having said that, I'm trying to get to where I need to get to. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Brent Schillinger, who is co-chair of the League of Women Voters Palm Beach County Healthcare Committee, a past president of the Palm Beach County Medical Society, and currently chairs the society's opioid healthcare response initiative. He received his MD at Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York. He has chaired the Council on Ethical and Judicial Affairs for both the Palm Beach County Medical Society and the Florida Medical Society. Brent represents the medical community on the Palm Beach Ethics Coalition and serves as vice chair of the Florida Policy Institute, a nonpartisan think tank that focuses on the fiscal impact of education, affordable housing, food supply, and healthcare issues. He holds the clinical academic appointments at Nova Southeastern University, Florida Atlantic University, and the University of Miami. Dr. Schillinger is going to be our moderator for this evening. And I do have to add one more thing about the league. We are nonpartisan. We don't support candidates. We don't support parties, but we are political where we take stands on issues. So Brent, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy. So welcome everyone to this evening's program. The title, as you've seen in all the promotional material and on the screen here, is Environmental Pollutants versus Human Health, and the winner is. So hopefully we'll have some idea by the end of this evening's program who the winner is. There's a lot of issues here, We're going to take a look at some of them. This is such a timely discussion, you know, every day in the news, including in the news today, there's discussion of the environmental pollutants and how they affect us, particularly our health. You see that whether you look at the Palm Beach Post, the Sun Sentinel, whether it's NPR, Apple News, Yahoo News, or one of the many other news sources. There's so many of those out there today. Like I said, there's a lot of issues. Two of the areas that you're going to hear a lot of focus on this evening with the local perspective is the pre-harvest burns, with we already heard some reference to that from Big Sugar, and then the Lake Okeechobee pollution issue, Lake Okeechobee and the estuaries with the red tide and the blue-green algae and how that affects everything. So tonight, the focus is going to be on the health impact, which I think is really a critical issue. You know, we can talk about all the other things, and the health impact when it comes to environmental pollutants often plays second fiddle to economic and political priorities, and we'll be talking about some of those as well, but the emphasis on the health impact. So we have an esteemed panel of all-star speakers this evening. Four of them. We're going to first hear an overview of health impact from environmental pollutants. That'll be presented by Dr. Ankush Bansal. Then a clinician's perspective from the trenches. Dr. Anthony Pearson-Shaver will be here with that. That'll be followed by the Sierra Club's overview of environmental injustice issues presented by Patrick Ferguson. And then what can we do moving forward to really make a difference? Howard Simon is here to give us that information. And of course, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. Please put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to make sure we get to those as well. So first up, Dr. Ankush Bansal. And you know, each of the four speakers are actually people that I kind of have some personal connection with. Ankush and myself have worked together on some projects through Palm Beach County Medical Society and the Florida Medical Association. As far as his credentials, he is a Palm Beach County-based traveling hospitalist, board-certified internal medicine and lifestyle medicine. He earned his MD from Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, did his residency training at Christiana Care in Wilmington, Delaware. Currently, Dr. Bansal serves as a voluntary clinical assistant professor of medicine at the FIU College of Medicine in Miami. He's governor-elect of the Florida chapter of the American College of Physicians. Most relevant to tonight's program, Dr. Bansal is co-founder and co-chair of the Florida Clinicians for Climate Action. He's also co-founder of Climate Reality Project Palm Beach, and he's a board member of the Florida Physicians for Social Responsibility. Dr. Ankush Bansal.
Thanks so much, Brent. Hi, everybody. My name is Ankush Bansal, and as Brent mentioned, I am a hospitalist and internist based in Delray Beach, Florida. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the environmental hazards that can affect human health here in Florida. Now, there's a lot of these environmental hazards. There's things like microplastics in water and food, the forever chemicals in water, soil, and food as well, PCBs, smoke from sugarcane refineries and industry, over-fertilization in water and soil, and aerial pesticides. So there's a lot of things, but today I'm only going to focus on two things. The first is going to be the algal blooms, and the second is going to be on lead poisoning, particularly in water. So let me start off with algal blooms. So this is a satellite photo taken in July of 2018 of the southwest corner of Lake Okeechobee. And if you can see that there is this greenish cloud in the middle of the lake. Now that's not normal. What that is algae. It's an algal bloom. And this has become an almost annual event in Florida, and it affects Palm Beach and Martin counties particularly in 2016 and 2018. So what causes algae blooms? Well, it's nutrient pollution from domestic, industrial, and agricultural waste, resulting in high concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus, which then spill into the waterways. And again, these come primarily from agriculture, leaky septic systems, and fertilizer runoff. Now, all of this is due to climate change, such as heat, drought, soil erosion, but also water management policies, which result in soil nutrient depletion and animal waste in water. So what's the climate change link? Well, climate change makes algal blooms worse. The higher the temperature, the more nutrient pollution there is, and therefore the more algal blooms. And the warmer it gets, the harder it will be to control unless we control the nutrient input into the water. So this is a picture of the Gulf during a red tide. And you can tell it's a red tide because you see this red stripe out in the ocean where it shouldn't be. Now, red tides primarily occur from saltwater sources that then invade the lakes, rivers, and estuaries, and it's from an organism class called dinoflagellates. There's also blue-green algae, which are generally beneficial, but when the water has a low salt concentration because of over-fertilization, the algae create what's called a surface scum, which cuts off oxygen and nutrients and makes the water acidic. So what are some of these agents that affect us here in Florida? And by the way, all of them cause direct human health hazards. Well, the most talked about one are cyanotoxins and this organism called Creighton brevis. But there's some others that affect us here in Florida, particularly in Lake Okeechobee. Pseudonychia is another organism. This produces a toxin called amnesic shellfish poisoning. Peridinium produces something called saxitoxins. And Gamberdiscus, which produces a toxin that causes ciguatera fish poisoning, which many of you may have heard of before. Now, this is different than what happens in the Gulf of Mexico. So if you hear somebody talking about dinophysis, it can happen in Florida, in the lakes, but it primarily happens more in the Gulf. So what are the health effects of algae blooms? So let's talk about Creighton brevis, first of all. Now, these next two slides, there's going to be a lot of information. I just want to give you the overview of how it affects your health. So this Creighton brevis causes the red tide. It produces a neurotoxin. Now, this neurotoxin can be suspended in the air near the beaches. So it can cause breathing problems too. So it's not that you have to be in the water. You can be near the water and still be affected by this. It can accumulate in shellfish, and this causes neurotoxic shellfish poisoning. So if you eat contaminated shellfish, you can get things like nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, diarrhea. But it also causes widespread kill-off of fish, turtles, birds, and marine mammals. Now, this occurs more often in Southwest Florida, but it has occurred in Lake Okeechobee and in South Florida. So what are some of the symptoms? You get eye irritation, you can get runny nose, cough, you can have trouble breathing, you can get dizziness, and you can get skin rashes. And I saw this back in 2016 working up in Stewart, some of these skin rashes and the breathing problems. But most people recover in a few days. And the remedy is, get away from the beach because then you're not going to be near the exposure. But because it causes breathing problems, this can be really problematic for people with asthma, COPD, or the elderly. Now, scientists have done some study on this, and they've looked at manatees who have died because of this. And obviously, manatees can't get away from the water because they live in water. And what they found on autopsy of these manatees is that they develop bleeding in the lungs meningitis, and something called hemolytic anemia, where your red blood cells basically blow up or get destroyed in your body. So what about some of the other organisms that I mentioned? Well, pseudonychia, that's the one that causes amnesic shellfish poisoning. So this can cause nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, just like before. But the difference is this can also cause disorientation, short-term memory loss, even seizure, coma, or death. And because of that, sometimes people need seizure medicines in severe cases. The next one, pyridinium, this is the organism that causes the saxitoxin that I mentioned before. Now, this is neurotoxic. As little as a 10-minute exposure, you can start getting symptoms, and it may last several days. And you can get tingling, numbness, balance issues, appear as if you're drunk, but it can also lead to you stopping breathing. And the problem with this is there's no antidote for this. The last thing I mentioned was ciguatera poisoning. This comes from coral reef communities. And there's an estimate in the scientific literature that about 1 million people are poisoned by this globally every year. And in fact, they estimate that 50% of the residents of the Virgin Islands have had this at least once in their life. Now, with this, you can get all of the symptoms I mentioned for the other two, but you can get heart rhythm problems too. So it can cause cardiac issues. So that's scary. Moving on to lead poisoning. So lead poisoning, particularly in water, is a bigger problem than Flint, Michigan. The sources are plumbing, industrial, mines, and smelter waste. Now, interestingly, the US government says that the safe, quote, safe level of lead in the water is a concentration of 15 micrograms per liter. But the funny thing is, the World Health Organization says, no, it's 1 microgram per liter. The EPA says that the blood lead level, so different than the lead in the water, but the level of lead in your blood in children should be less than 5 micrograms per deciliter. But if you talk to medical experts and read the studies, all of them say it should be 0. There should not be lead in your blood at all. Any amount of lead can be dangerous. Now, the important thing here for everybody to understand is that if you have plumbing in your house or in your office that was built before 1988, it could contain lead. And the reason is the EPA banned lead solder and other lead materials in household plumbing in June of 1988. It can also be in brass fixtures if it was before that time. So because of that, the recommendation is if you have those old pipes, filter your tap water. And the other thing that I guess most people don't know is that if you have those possible lead containing pipes, don't run hot water from your tap, because apparently hot water will leach more lead out of the pipe than cold water. So instead, get the cold water and just boil it if you need hot water. So what are the health effects? Well, it affects children more than adults. And that's because children absorb 30 to 75% of the lead from water when they ingest it, while adults absorb only 11%. It can taste sweet, but usually it's tasteless. And here's the kicker here. A 10 microgram deciliter increase in blood lead levels can result in a loss of 2 IQ points. So it results in decreased intelligence and growth. It can affect your hearing, irritability, weight loss, vomiting, even coma and convulsions. It can cause damage to the brain, kidneys, and bone marrow. An important point here. So if you have lead in the water, technically bathing is okay because the skin can't absorb the lead from the water. It's ingestion. Now, skin can absorb lead in other ways, but from the water, no. And if you have a well at your house, this is a very important point. If you have somebody who's pregnant, an infant, or a child under age 18, and you use well water, test it. Make sure there's no lead, because it's possible there could be lead. So what's being done in Florida about this? Well, in the current session, there's actually 3 bills, 2 in the Senate, 1 in the House, talking about lead in the water, primarily in the public schools. These are the sponsors and the co-sponsors. You can see that there's 3 from South Florida, 1 from each of the South Florida counties. all are moving through committees. And Senator Farmer from Broward, he put out a press release when he introduced Senate Bill 1648 last month. And this is a quote that I picked out from there. So they tested several school campuses around the state. And in those school campuses they tested, 50% had a lead content that was higher than the dangerous level threshold. And on top of that, most of the schools in the state were built before 1988. So therefore, the hypothesis is that there's probably a lot more schools that have lead in their water, and we just don't know about it. And children have been getting poisoned with lead for decades in the Florida public schools. So they're working on trying to rectify that. Moving on to lead poisoning in air. This usually comes from general industry, shipyards, and construction. Now, OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, this is the government organization that protects workers in their place of employment. They say that the maximum exposure limit is 50. Don't worry about the units. It's just 50 micrograms per cubic meter in 8 hours. That's in the air. But they mandate that the employers have to take action when it hits 30. And what they say is that when their blood lead level is above 40, then the employer has to keep them away from that exposure until the blood lead level goes below 40 or 50, depending on the industry. And you're probably all aware of the infamous Gopher resource case in Tampa last year, where there was a big release of lead, or actually it wasn't sudden, it was known for a long time. And a lot of people have gotten poisoned and they're still following that. So far, they know of at least 16 children that were directly affected by this, probably many, many more. Lastly, lead poisoning in soil. So this can track into homes. Kids can directly ingest it. You know, when kids play outside, some of they eat dirt, or they're in the sandbox and they eat sand, could be lead there. And then this is kind of scary. If you have a lot of lead in the soil, apparently your vegetables can take it up from your vegetable garden. So that's another scary thing. Now, naturally, soil has less than 50 parts per million of lead, but urban areas can be more than 200 parts per million. Back in 1994, there was a scientific study where they studied areas of Tampa, and they found that there were a lot of areas in Tampa that had more than 500 parts per million. And then lastly for this is kind of scary, and I really don't understand this, is that the EPA says that the standard for playgrounds, play areas, you can have 400 parts per million of lead in the play areas, 1,200 in the non-play areas before you have to take action. So I'm going to stop there. These are some of the resources that you can use to follow the algal blooms, both from the federal government as well as from the state. And then some information about the Gopher resource case in Tampa. And these are the sources that I use to get some of that data. So I'll stop there, and if there's any questions, I'll follow the lead of Dr. Schillinger. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankush, for that excellent overview of some of the pollutant problems that we have in Florida. The more we hear about it, the scarier it is. That's why it's so important that we're having these discussions. So next up, Dr. Anthony Pearson Shaver. Another guy I know, Tony and I have worked together training residents at the Palm Beach Consortium for Graduate Education. I think they still call it that. These names change frequently. Tony is director of the Pediatric Residency Program at the Children's Hospital at Palms West. He chairs and is clinical professor at Southeastern University's Kiran Patel College of Allopathic Medicine. Dr. Pearson Shaver received his MD from the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, after which he completed a residency at the National Health Service Corps in Tennessee. He trained as a pediatric critical care fellow at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, spent 26 years at the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University, where he served as medical director of the pediatric transport team and pediatric ICU. He's chief of pediatric critical care medicine and the clinical service chief there of pediatric medicine. Dr. Pearson Shaver served as chair of pediatrics at Mercer University School of Medicine and medical director at the Children's Hospital Navicent Health in Macon, Georgia. So Tony's going to bring us up to date on some of his personal observations and some work he's doing to scientifically have some evidence-based data to talk about some of the specific environmental pollutants and their health implications right here in Palm Beach County. Tony?
Oh, well, thank you very much. I don't have slides, and I'm going to leave this discussion pretending that all you guys are parents of a patient. Okay. One of the things that we know is that children who have very reactive lungs respond to particulate matter in the air. And particularly with the practice of the pre-harvest burning of the sugarcane, we suspect that children in those areas have more problems during those times of the year than they do at other times. Let's start talking a little bit about asthma, and then we'll talk about our observations. Asthma is an allergic reaction to something. Now, generally, it's something that's either related to something the patient's directly allergic to, like, for instance, a kid with nuts who walks into a house where they've been baking, a kid with a nut allergy, rather, who walks in the house where his grandma's been baking pecan rolls all day long. I'm from Georgia, so it's pecan roll. Or you've got a patient who is particularly allergic to a particular pollen, walks into a greenhouse. Or probably more commonly what happens, the kid goes to the fair and he then starts having some trouble. But asthma attacks can also be brought on by changes in weather. Generally, it's going from hot to cold, but it probably is not cold enough in Florida for that to be a real big problem, as it is for some of our friends north. We also notice it in some children who, with exercise, that there is exercise-induced asthma that can cause some problems. And the asthma itself, there are three components of asthma in terms of how it affects your lungs. One is it creates an inflammation in the smaller airways, so that the airway wall gets a little thicker. Two is it actually creates or causes what we call bronchospasm. So the smooth muscle in the airway gets tighter and narrows the channel through which the patients breathe. And the third thing is because of all the inflammatory response with respect to all the defense mechanisms that are brought into play, is that patients then also develop a lot more mucus in those airways. Asthma is a big problem in the United States. Like I was reading the data, some of the data that my residents reported. They reported 5 million kids with asthma. I think that it's a little bit more than that. Asthma does also tend to have a regional and important ethnocentric, I guess you'd call it, epidemiology. It's much more common in the Southeast, the Southwest, though though you can see it throughout the country. Much more common ethnically in African American and Hispanic children. So, we got two big populations of that here. Shortly after I arrived in Loxahatchee, I had a couple residents that approached me with, it seems to be a couple times of the year that our asthma admissions really increase. And so we wanted to take a look at that. And what we did was we looked at children from 2016 to 2018, so well before COVID. And we divided each year into 4 quarters. So quarter 1, which is January to March, and quarter 4, which is September to December, are the primary burning seasons. So then in quarter 2 and quarter 3, which are the spring and summer, are are relatively free. And what we noticed was that in our area being Loxahatchee at Palms West, that the number of asthma exacerbations increases during quarters 1 and 4. And it's a relatively significant increase. And as you suspect with the other epidemiologic factors, it follows that we have more African-American children and more Hispanic children that are presenting and getting admitted during those times for asthma exacerbation. Because we work through HCA, there were some limits that were placed on the amount of data that we could get. So there are a few things that I think I need to be fully, full disclosure, need to express. One, we don't have good community level data. That means that we were not actually allowed to track kids by their zip codes, because in order for us to do that, we would have had to have a different sort of IRB request, an IRB proposal. I think if second steps of this project will probably be done through NOVA, and then we'll be able to get sort of to some of that more granular material. And in addition to that, we weren't able to kind of do any further evaluation of where patients were coming from. So I can't tell you how many kids came from Belle Glade versus how many came from Pahokee versus how many came from Clewiston. We know, though, that those are the primary areas that a lot of these kids are coming from there, as well as some kids closer to us in Palm Beach County. And another thing that I think we need to consider, that we've got to ferret out a little bit more. As we did our study, we tried very hard to exclude those children who might have had a cause for their asthma other than just an allergy. That is, the kids who had respiratory diseases, viruses, and we could correlate that with some sort of viral infection. But it still represents a little bit of a problem with our patients, because it just so happens that quarters 2 and 4 happen to be during the spring and summer, when fewer kids are sick. So that if you kind of look at the admission rate at children's hospitals, you would notice that if you started in July, remember my world starts in July. My year always starts in July, with July 1st with the new interns. So we sort of follow an intern's experience. In pediatrics, they kind of get there and they're wondering what in the world the hospital is built for, because nobody's there. You know, because kids don't get sick. And in this area, since we're not a big trauma center and a big surgery center, we don't see them. But then as October comes around, suddenly the people who are working on the floor are going, oh my goodness, could somebody just do something to keep some of these kids at home? Because all of a sudden the pediatric population swells, and it swells from about October to March, at which time the kids get sick well again, and it decreases. Well, because of the way we divided our patients, I think that some of the factors that influence our admissions may be related to the fact that it's just summertime, and kids don't tend to get as sick as often during the summer. So there's some of the secondary respiratory illnesses we might not have seen. But I think that we have enough data to suggest that the increase in particulate matter in the air during the times that the cane is being burned, I think it suggests that there might be an association, and we can look a little bit further. And I've got to tell you all, I would love to see our part of Florida go to a no burning agricultural business. I don't know that will help, but as a pediatrician, what I'm most interested in seeing is it would be helpful, I think, if somehow the farmers could let us know when burning is going to happen. And I think that some of the pediatricians in the area could then adjust how they're treating patients. shortly after I moved here, I actually, a pediatrician from Pahokee is a member of my church. And I mentioned this all to her, and she kind of looked at me as if I had three heads and said, you realize that for our most brittle asthmatics and our kids with chronic lung disease, we just increased their medicine in October. We increase it in October, and then if things have gone okay, then we decrease it again in March. And it's like, okay, so we have found a way to work around the problem without actually addressing it. Realizing the impact that Florida crystals, U.S. sugar has on the economy in this area, I think it would be very difficult to politically try to change minds. But I don't think any of the farmers or the executives at either of those two companies would be adverse to trying to partnering with us to help sort of control the problem. So, I think that, and just as an aside, a mutual friend of Brent's and mine is Brad Foyer. Brad, it happens to be he's the chief surgeon for the Florida Highway Patrol. And for about a year and a half, when he got out, particularly when he was on the road, he would get out, and if he saw the big fume clouds coming across Palm Beach County, he would take a picture and send it to me. And I got to tell you, they're pretty impressive looking. The people I visited Florida Crystals, and their scientists actually think that that when they burn, their particles are very small. They go directly up to the jet stream and they go east, so that nobody between Belglade and I will say Palm Beach has to deal with that. Now, everybody on this, I'm sure on this call, recognizes that gravity is a thing. So that if there's not a jet stream, or the wind there is not blowing faster than the wind every place else, it gets deposited. So I mean, I think that Brad would always tell me they're just doing magical thinking. It's just a magical thinking thing that ultimately they'll come along. But I do think that it is an issue for our community, and there have actually been a couple other reports. I think the Sierra Club published a report probably about 6 months ago, and I can't remember who did the second study, but there is a study out there that actually isn't much closer than ours to being able to define the population that are affected. So my 12 minutes are up. I'm perfectly willing to take questions since I have 15, but I think Brent wants to leave those to the end.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, Tony, for sharing some of your personal perspectives. I think that gives us some really excellent insight as to what's going on here. Next up, Patrick Ferguson with the Sierra Club. I'll mention my connection with the Sierra. Well, Patrick, I've met over Zoom as we've planned this meeting. My connection with the Sierra Club actually goes back to 1963 as a 10-year-old little boy growing up in the Hudson Valley in New York. And in those days, there was something called the Con Edison Hydroelectric Project at Storm King Mountain. That's right where I lived in Cornwall. And this was supposed to be the greatest thing for our community. It was going to bring in all kinds of tax dollars and jobs and all this kind of stuff. And the Sierra Club was painted as the enemy, a bunch of bird watchers. I remember that reference. And so as a little kid, I thought the right thing to do was go around getting people to sign petitions that we want this project, get these environmentalists out of here. Certainly over the years, I think the understanding of what's going on has changed, but that's just a kind of a reference to how media and public opinion and big money can sway things. I mean, that was like a 40-year fight, and finally they gave up. And you look back and you see if Con Edison had persisted, they would have cut away like half of the mountain. There'd be all kinds of problems going on. So played a very important role, but I always think of Sierra Club back in the early 60s. Anyway, Patrick, he comes to us through the Sierra Club, where he is the organizing representative of the group's Stop Sugar Field Burning campaign. Stop the Burn. Patrick's an attorney. He received his law degree from Southeastern University School of Law and his undergraduate degree in political science from the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining the Sierra Club, Patrick was engaged in private general practice and local activism for numerous environmental and progressive causes in the Broward County area. He organized Fort Lauderdale's Global Climate March in November of 2015. He was an adjunct professor teaching undergraduate courses then of environmental law at Nova Southeastern. So, Patrick, please bring us your perspective.
All right. Thank you very much. Sorry to everyone. Today it's going to be, I'm going to give you a more focused presentation on pre-harvest sugar field burning. Do a brief overview of the issue in general and its negative impacts, but really, touch upon what I have learned in working on this issue hand in hand with residents from the Glades communities who are ultimately leading this campaign work over the past 5 years, to give you a sense of how they're impacted by this issue on a yearly basis. First and foremost, though, for those of you who aren't as familiar with the how and the why of pre-harvest sugar field burning. Historically speaking, sugar growers dating back before the age of modern mechanical harvesters had been in the practice of burning the outer leaves and tops of the sugarcane plant to remove pests from the field and make the cane much more easier to cut prior to harvest. Flash forward to the age of mechanical harvesters, which are equipped to mechanically separate the leaves and tops from the sugarcane bearing billets. The practice is maintained as a means to make for a quicker and cheaper harvest overall by reducing the overall amount of biomass plant material that the sugar growers, sugar manufacturers have to process and transport. And to give you all an idea of the scope of the practice, takes place roughly each year. 400,000 acres of sugarcane fields are burned in Florida. Sugarcane is grown in all the counties which border Lake Okeechobee. But the vast majority, roughly 75% of the commercial acreage is grown right here in Palm Beach County. And the season begins in October of each year and lasts for the past few years through early to mid-May. And to give a further idea of the scale, the EPA's National Emissions Inventory Database for agricultural fires lists Palm Beach County is producing more emissions from agricultural fires than any other county in the entire United States. Now, to get into the pollution that is produced, there have been several emissions factor studies, including multiple that have been carried out in Florida, that have identified the wide variety of pollutants that are produced by burning sugarcane, as I've got listed on the slide right there. And certainly there's a large body of research, that links the various health elements connected with exposure to such pollutants. But one recent study I'd like to draw your attention to that I have referenced on the slide from a few months ago. This came out of the University of Stanford, a project they were doing to map wildfire exposure and impacts across the entire United States. And they made a surprising finding that they weren't expecting. And that the zip codes within Florida where sugarcane grows have some of the worst recorded smoke days throughout the year than any other zip codes in the entire United States, including those in California that have been subject to historical wildfire impacts in recent years. Furthermore, there's been a large body of medical research around the world and also in other states relating to the health impacts related to exposure to sugarcane burning pollution. But as Dr. Pearson-Shaver referred to earlier, there's not been detailed research that has been carried out in Florida as of yet. Nonetheless, recently, this is what came out of some of the investigative reporting done by ProPublica, which was in partnership with several academics. And they were able to actually take some zip code information for Belglade, the largest of the cities within the Everglades agricultural area impacted by sugarcane burning, and did find that there was up to 35% increase for respiratory hospital admissions during those months. And certainly, as I'll get into a little bit more in my presentation, that it's the respiratory impacts that I hear the most about in dealing with folks within the Glades communities. In fact, I was shocked when I first started organizing the communities. I heard several stories that residents had been told by their doctors that the best long-term solution for some of their reoccurring respiratory health impacts is simply move to another area with better year-round air quality, which is not something many folks have the resources, nor the desire to, nor should they have to within the Glades communities. It's very important to identify what makes pre-harvest sugar field burning a glaring example of an environmental justice issue, which in effect is an example of environmental racism right here within Palm Beach County. But to really break that down, you've got to start with the regulations in place. First and foremost, pre-harvest sugar field burning is regulated and permitted by the Florida Forest Service, which is under the control of Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So historically speaking, back in the early 90s, as central Palm Beach County was getting more built out, in particular communities like Wellington, Royal Palm Beach, you had residents who for the first time were being exposed to the seasonal smoke and ash from sugarcane burning. This led to a large documented public outcry during that time period, which led to the state and the sugar industry to relatively quickly enact a series of wind direction and speed based regulations, which are largely still in place. And in effect, depending on the location of the field and the strength and direction of wind on a given day, if it's projected to carry smoke and ash toward central and eastern Palm Beach County, then that burn permit can be denied. Whereas when the wind would carry the smoke and ash towards the Glades communities, which are largely Black and brown communities, lower income communities, then there's otherwise minimal protections put in place. So you got a situation where these communities have to bear the brunt of this toxic and outdated harvesting practice, whereby the regulations in place, not to say that folks all throughout the county aren't impacted, especially to this day, folks Wellington and Loxahatchee are impacted. And in speaking with folks who work at the Florida Forest Service, they admit they deal with an imperfect science. Wind conditions can change very quickly, but nonetheless, you have a glaring example that the regulations in place do prioritize protecting communities in the east over communities within the Everglades agricultural area, which, remember, are wrapped around 75% of the total sugarcane acreage. And this is reflective of a larger problem in our country where, you name it, zoning regulations and regulations on pollution throughout the country, in several different states prioritize often protecting more affluent white communities, while predominantly Black and brown communities have to disproportionately suffer from pollution exposures. And that's what makes pre-harvest sugar field burning such a glaring example of an environmental justice issue. But to really break it down, and understand, what it means, what environmental injustice means. I try to get people to look through the perspective of living in a community in Florida where it snows. It snows black snow persistently. Asphalt that rains down, stains, all properties in the region for 6 to 8 months out of the year. Residents are left to foot the bill, to clean up the soot off their properties, their homes, their cars. And, I hear, in particular, folks have to change their air conditioning filters every month during the harvesting season to keep up with the soot buildup. And you can imagine, homes that don't have within the area that might not have the best ventilation put in place, the type of impacts that this persistent soot impact, can build up. And in addition to that, I often hear from parents whose children suffer from asthma and require the use of nebulizers. And they have to make tough decisions during the harvesting season as to whether or not to let their kids go out and play and enjoy, outdoor activities. Some of the best times of the year to be outside in Florida, due to concerns about air quality during the harvesting season. And, some of the more emotional conversations I've had, I've certainly been with folks who suffer from severe respiratory issues like COPD. And I've spoken to folks who say, during the harvesting season, they feel like a prisoner in their home sometimes because on days when there's a lot of burning going on, leaving their house and engaging in any kind of strenuous activity could quite literally be a life or death situation. And, and going back to, the concerns I often, hear from parents from the perspective to really put the, the impacts into perspective. We have volunteers whose children have gone to school. And in fact, this picture I have down in the corner of my screen is taken by a teacher, local elementary school in South Bay called Rosenwald, taken during school hours. And that same school in the past had to be evacuated due to the fact that smoke from a nearby burn seeped through the vents, that they had a practice that the vents are supposed to be closed during the harvesting season, and that didn't happen on the state. And up to 6 kids had to be rushed to the hospital after suffering severe asthma attacks, and 9 others on site. And then, so imagine this being a part of life. And then, you hear that that there's an alternative. And in fact, that the sugar industry regularly does practice green harvesting when burn permits are denied. Or in certain circumstances, like we found out, the sugarcane fields surrounding a Walmart in Clewiston are green harvested, which is done supposedly as a courtesy to the nearby residents. And this community campaign is fundamentally all about extending that same courtesy, so that folks don't have to deal with this pollution and this ashfall from sugarcane fields around their homes, schools, and businesses for 8 months out of the year. And to further compound that, you can imagine the frustration that folks have in, seeing that the regulations prioritize, protecting communities towards the east. And, this is what really makes this such a glaring example of an environmental justice issue. And, I ask folks to put themselves in in the shoes of residents, dealing, with this 6 to 8 months out of the year. Ask yourself, would you tolerate having to deal with this persistent pollution, this persistent ashfall, and the cleanup bills, that you have to deal with? And, more often than not, the answer is no. And nor should the folks in the Glades communities have to deal with this, considering the fact that there's a readily available alternative And this alternative, as I can get into a little bit later, can also bring new economic opportunities to Glades as well. But to really put things in perspective, I've got two short videos.
So this is right outside of my home. When I walk out the door, this is how close the smoke covers over our community.
And now I'll show you a video of to kind of capture what the black snow is like on a day during the harvesting season. This was taken in Pahokee. And, to take things back to the campaign, for the past couple years, our primary focus has been pressing the agricultural commissioner, who's currently Nikki Freed, to institute some common sense buffer zone protections, which would lead to a first phase and an eventual complete phase out of pre-harvest sugar field burning in favor of green harvesting, and also prioritize protecting some of the most impacted communities by pre-harvest sugar field burning. And I'd be happy to share more information on the chat and maybe get into more Q&A about how folks can get involved. And also generally, when I give these presentations, I spend a lot more time getting into the benefits of the alternative of green harvesting. But in the interest of time, and also pique your interest, there's going to be a great webinar held next week that'll include representatives of the Brazilian sugarcane industry. And it's going to focus how they transitioned away from burning to green harvesting. They're going to talk about how within the Florida context that this could be possible as well. Because certainly I'd be happy to get into more of those details in Q&A. Because certainly this campaign is not about putting the sugar industry out of business. It's about protecting public health and the environment, and creating new opportunity as well. So green harvesting is certainly a win-win-win that we're promoting. Otherwise, I'll leave it at that, and I'd be happy to address further questions during Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for that excellent overview of the problems related to the burning of the sugar cane. It's just amazing the stuff that's going on so close to home. And now, very important presentation to help guide us into what we can do to make a difference. We have League of Women Voters, we have the Sierra Club, two organizations filled with people who are advocates for the right thing. And it's frustrating sometimes because it feels like we know what needs to be done. How do we get there? So up next, Howard Simon. So Howard and I know each other. We both serve on the board of the Florida Policy Institute for the last couple of years. And I'll mention something that's not in his regular CV. I know that Howard was raised in Mount Vernon, New York. So for you Westchester County fans, he's a Mount Vernon guy, which is where my dad was born and raised. So Howard holds the distinction of being the longest serving state director in the history of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. For 21 consecutive years, Howard led the Florida chapter of ACLU. Prior to his leadership in Florida, Howard served as executive director for the Michigan chapter of ACLU. That's a cumulative 44-year career. Makes him the longest in the 100-year history, the longest for cumulative years at ACLU. Howard earned his undergraduate degree from City College in New York, earned a PhD in legal and political philosophy from the University of Minnesota. Most pertinent to tonight's focus, after his retirement from the ACLU, he couldn't just sit around and do nothing. Howard created and serves as president of the Clean Okeechobee Waters Foundation. That's a group that works with scientists and physicians who have linked toxins produced by the harmful algal blooms to neurological illnesses, including ALS and Alzheimer's. Howard? Unmute.
Okay, that would help.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. So as Brent indicated, I am not a scientist. I am a policy advocacy person and have done so for more than 4 decades with the American Civil Liberties Union. But I want to say in the introduction to my remarks and apropos of the title of this presentation, that I don't think it's alarmist to say that the people of Florida, especially people who live near a working or abandoned phosphate mine, or who are rained on by ash from burning sugarcane, or who come in contact with blue-green algae infested waters, or consume fish or breathe air nearby, are slowly being poisoned with liver and other forms of cancer, and are at a higher risk for Alzheimer's and ALS, all of which are terminal diseases. So some of what I wanted to say has been said already. I want to briefly review maybe about very briefly, five environmental health controversies that are taking place in Florida. And then I want to end with about a half a dozen political suggestions for how we can address the problem. So the first one I want to deal with is phosphate mining. Florida provides about 25% of the world's supply of phosphate for fertilizer. I don't know how many of you knew that. Phosphate has been mined in Florida for more than 100 years. There are more than 24 mines operating in Florida. They are large open pit mines covering more than 450,000 acres, mostly in west and central Florida. 9 phosphate mines are currently active. During the mining process, a radioactive contaminant of phosphate, something called radium-226, is unearthed from buried deposits and piled in mounds on the surface, where it sits, waiting to be blown into the air, into our water, and into our lungs. Radium produces cancer-causing gamma rays that can penetrate the body and increase the risk of many cancers, including lymphoma, leukemia, thyroid, lung, and bladder cancer. These cancers may take years to develop, although some cancers develop sooner. But as radium decays, it eventually turns into radon, an odorless radioactive gas that has been identified as a carcinogen that can increase the risk of lung cancer. Radon seeps into homes and polluting the indoor air. In many parts of western Florida, parks and neighborhoods have been built on top of reclaimed phosphate mines, exposing the residents to dangerous levels of radiation left over from the mining process. And this exposure may leads to an elevated cancer risk. And as radioactive material from phosphate mining has produced cancer clusters near the mines. The National Cancer Institute has reported a significant increase in the overall rate of childhood cancers in recent decades, up 27% since 1975 in children under age 19, even though the overall incidence of adult cancers has fallen. Okay, phosphate mining. Number 2, sugarcane burning. You've already heard about this, and I'm not going to recite what Patrick has already spoken about. But during the burning of the sugarcane, there has been an increase in hospital admissions for respiratory issues that include breathing problems and chest pains, And there is mounting evidence that Patrick indicated in one of his slides that ash from the burning sugarcane fields can cause long-term health problems. Number 3, Florida red tide, Karenia brevis. From 2016, Florida experienced historic outbreaks both of red tide and massive cyanobacterial blooms along the St. Lucie River to the Indian River Lagoon and down the 140-mile estuary of the Club-Loxahatchee River. This was caused by the release of cyanobacteria-laden water from Lake Okeechobee. Red tide is a naturally occurring phenomena in the Gulf of Mexico, but when the algae-rich water from Lake Okeechobee reached the Gulf, the nutrient-rich water inflamed the red tide. And we all, I think, remember the effects of the massive toxic vice of both the red tide and the blue-green algae. Tons of dead fish on coastal beaches and a devastating impact on Florida's tourist-based economy, including hotel occupancy, restaurants, fish charters, and even real estate values. There was also an increase in hospital admissions for people who suffered respiratory discomfort during the outbreak of red tide. The long-term health effects of red tide are not fully known. Blue-green algae and the connection of blue-green algae to non-alcoholic liver cancer. Blue-green algae or cyanobacteria produces cyanotoxins, that is poisons. One toxin, and I have to say there are numerous toxins produced by blue-green algae. We are just beginning to scratch the surface in our understanding of the toxins produced by blue-green algae. But one toxin, microcystin, is a potent toxin and a human carcinogen that is a cause of non-alcoholic liver cancer. Research published in 2015 linked the distribution of non-alcoholic liver disease in the United States to the location of cyanobacteria blooms. The World Health Organization has set guidelines for microcystin concentration for drinking water and recreational water use. During the historic outbreak in Florida in 2016-2018, 2 scientists that I work with from the brain chemistry labs, Dr. Paul Cox and Dr. James Metcalf, came to Florida and took water samples and reported that the microcystin level in samples from Lake Okeechobee and the St. Lucie Canal were 300 times what the United Nations recommended as safe. In their paper on the effects of the 2016 cyanobacterial bloom, Cox and Metcalf noted, and I just want to read 2 sentences from their conclusion. Based on the microcystin content reported here, it is reasonable prediction that the cohort of Florida citizens exposed to the 2016 Florida cyanobacteria bloom incident, including children of underprivileged families that we witnessed picnicking, fishing, and swimming in cyanobacteria contaminated waters, may experience an increased lifetime risk of liver cancer and/or hepatic dysfunction requiring hospitalization and transplantation. Lastly, blue-green algae and its connection to neurodegenerative diseases. Cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, also produces another neurotoxin called BMAA. And BMAA has been linked to neurodegenerative diseases, principally Alzheimer's and ALS. And more research, of course, needs to be done, but all of the evidence is pointing in the same direction. And this is from doctors with whom I work closely. The University of Miami Brain Endowment Bank reported that BMAA toxin is found in the brains of people with neurodegenerative diseases. Dr. David Davis of the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine reported that monkeys fed BMA developed symptoms of ALS. And in another study he did, he documented that monkeys given BMAA developed the amyloid plaque and tau tangles that are the symptoms of Alzheimer's. Let me just add one thing before I get to the principal part of what I wanted to talk about, in that the toxins that I've talked about in blue-green algae also are airborne. There's a Dartmouth doctor, Dr. Elijah Stommel, who has reported that people living near water with heavy blue-green algae concentration blooms have a 15 times greater chance of getting ALS. Florida Gulf Coast University marine biologist Mike Parsons has found airborne cyanobacteria toxins a mile from ponds and 3 miles from the Club-Loxahatchee River, and so on. Let me talk about, so this is bad news. I think in the, as I said earlier, in terms of the title of this panel, who's winning? I really think that the people of Florida are being slowly poisoned. Now, what can be done about it? I want to offer about 6 political suggestions. Suggestion number 1, public education. Exactly what the 2 organizations are doing this evening. Information is power, and information is the oxygen for organizing change. People need to be alarmed and angry about what's going on, both about the health risk and that toxins are not only in the water and the food supply, but also are airborne. Now, I think there has been some progress. Several years ago, whenever there was an outbreak of red tide or blue-green algae, the discussion was about the impact on fish kills, on the tourist-based economy, on fishing tourists, on fishing boat captains, and so on. Now there cannot be a discussion about an outbreak of blue-green algae or red tide without also a discussion about the public health consequences as well. And that's because water quality advocates have made a point. They've used public education to affect the narrative. The second suggestion I have is that we have to forge common interest. There is a divide and conquer factor that is taking place. Blue-green algae comes down the east and west estuaries. Red tide occurs in the east. Sugarcane burning occurs in Palm Beach and Hardy County. Phosphate mining occurs in West Florida. We have to be concerned about what's happening statewide, about the failure of our policies to have effective regulation that protect public health. And we need to do so by forging a common interest and not operate within our own idiosyncratic bubble of concerns. Third, we need to focus on the right policies that directly address the problem. We need strategies that prevent pollution at its source. As our former governor, Bob Graham, used to say all the time, we need to prevent pollution at its source. Most of the water in Lake Okeechobee comes from the north and the west. We need to focus on pollution that is dumped into Lake Okeechobee that feeds the blue-green algae, especially runoffs from phosphate and nitrogen fertilizers, from dairy and cattle farms, from human waste, from failed septic tanks, from development in the northern Kissimmee watershed as well. We also need enforceable regulations, and that involves the political will to impose regulations on powerful interests, principally agribusiness. Number 4, we need warnings to the public. If the state refuses or is unable to enact enforceable regulations, the least it can do is to warn the people of a health risk. The Department of Health has routinely dismissed the long-term risks of exposure to harmful algal blooms, and arguing that the suggestions of chronic liver or neurological diseases are unsubstantiated. The failure to take into account this mounting scientific evidence tells us that the state agencies are allowing the people to be slowly poisoned in Florida. Number 5, I think we have to have a realistic political analysis. And what I mean by that is 2 things. Number 1, this is a complicated area, and water battles have been going on in Florida for decades. And we need to figure out and understand correctly all the various interests that are part of this war about water quality and water quantity. There's the agricultural community, municipalities that are fighting for drinking water. There's the need for water for Everglades restoration. There's water to feed the tourism and recreation industries, and there are environmental concerns about water quality. But the second thing I mean by that is that we have to understand that Florida is ruled as a one-party state. And legislation does not pass in Florida unless it's embraced by Republican leadership. Republican leaders may grant the hearing on a bill sponsored by the minority party, but that's usually as a courtesy. But with few exceptions, legislation will not be enacted unless it is sponsored by Republicans and approved by Republican leadership. That means that we have to make a decision about whether we want to make a symbolic political statement or actually secure public policy. By a symbolic political statement, what I mean by that is that we can find any legislator to sponsor a bill, but that doesn't mean it's going to pass. We need to do the hard work, and the hard work is recruiting Republican legislators to this cause. And unless we recruit Republican legislators to this cause, we're not going to enact effective public policy to address this problem. Because we need Republican legislators to sponsor the legislation. The 6th thing that I want to say is that once we do find Republican sponsors for this legislation, we have to organize all the elements of a campaign, very much like a political campaign. We need a catchphrase. We need endorsers. We need trusted messengers. We need to use social media. We need to use advertising. We need to use a logo. The Sierra Club is well on its way to doing that with the Stop the Burn campaign. I think that's a good model to look at very carefully. But the last thing I want to say is, and this is maybe the most difficult thing to say, is that if we understand who can make the changes that will protect the public health by imposing meaningful regulations on the sources of pollution, which in Florida is principally agribusiness, then that is the legislature who enacts policies. It is the governor who advocates for those policies in the legislature and who directs the regulatory agencies. And I want to leave you with this very difficult but maybe unhappy message, that ultimately, if you want to change the policies, you need to change the policy makers.
Thank you. Thank you, Howard, for bringing this all together and giving us some direction as to where we can take this. So I think all 4 speakers have been terrific and have really covered these issues very thoroughly. We have some time left where we can take some questions and answers. You can send them in on the chat. We can dig a little bit deeper into the issues that have been very, very well defined. So the first question I have about the studies. You know, we're looking at this focus tonight on the health implications, and Howard just identified Floridians are basically being poisoned on many levels. So when we see the health implications, it seems to me policymakers, somebody needs to respond. And the answer we always hear is, well, we don't really have good studies. And just recently, you know, there was a big series in the Palm Beach Post and ProPublica. They dug deep into the data. They showed that the emergency rooms and hospital visits spike during the burn season. They made a case for, well, it sure sounds like it has something to do with the sugar burning. U.S. Sugar, Florida Crystals came out and said, there's no link. This is poor data. This is not good study material. And over the years, in both the sugar burning as well as more recently with the algal blooms, there have been attempts to do studies, but they just seem to be started and they don't go anywhere. When we hear a comment from industry, from an agribusiness industry, oh, these studies don't prove anything. Let me put this to our physicians. What's your take on that? Ankush?
Yeah, so, you know, this kind of reminds me of the tobacco industry. They were saying this for 40, 50, 60 years. There were tons of studies that showed the link between tobacco and lung cancer, long before the first US Surgeon General said that smoking causes cancer 50 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. What we need to do is, number one, more studies and robust studies. But again, your point to that the studies don't really go anywhere may be an issue of funding. A lot of the research funding in science comes from the federal government or nonprofit organizations. So number one, I would say we need to get the federal government to fund these studies, and we need to convince the nonprofit organizations and the benefactors to help fund those studies so that we can have more of the data. So that's phase one. Phase two is, okay, now that we have the data, we've got to do exactly what Howard said, is that we've got to change the politics so they actually read the studies and they actually follow the science. I know that we're in an anti-science era right now, not just COVID, but everything, including climate change. But I think that's the approach we got to take, because once you have the data and the data is convincing and you have study after study showing the link, you can't really argue with that. It becomes more of politics and silos.
So Tony, I'd like to hear your perspective on that. You made reference to the fact that getting the big sugar and agriculture interests involved in the discussion, and you sort of suggested that they had interest. My question would be, have you been able to have any conversations? It seems in almost everything I read, whether it's a news report or official organizational report, and meetings we've tried to have, seminars over the years through the Medical Society, through League of Women Voters. You reach out to the big sugar industries and either get no answer at all, or they just give you some type of routine statement. Oh, we really care about the environment, thank you. With that in mind, have you actually had any positive contact? I put that out to Tony. Who needs to unmute? Okay, we'll give him a moment on that, but I'll put that out to Patrick.
Sure. So I wouldn't say we've had too much positive contact, but and unfortunately, certain meetings that could have been fruitful just at a local level that were proposed, never seem to follow through. But I'd like to in reference to the issue of sugarcane burning in particular, and a point of research that I've looked into to try to, that would be so important to really move the ball forward on the transition to green harvesting, is with University of Florida, UF-IFAS does agricultural research. And, similarly, how there's been a lack in major studies on the health issues, there's been a lack in, ongoing research on the benefits of green harvesting here in Florida. And I've been able to attend events and speak to individuals there. And, I've been told that, hey, we'd love to do more research on green harvesting, but, the industry provides the funding that dictates the direction of where we go with the research. And, it really was frustrating to hear that I spoke with a sugarcane breeder who was responsible for developing new varieties. I talked about green harvesting and could you make a certain breed that would be best suited for green harvesting in Florida? He said, sure, but there's burning is a predominant practice, and there's no incentive or funding to do that kind of breeding. So, I think that there needs to be, a concerted effort to, provide funding for such important research. But ultimately, without the political will, it was touched upon how we do live, in an anti-science climate. You can't just think that, getting a smoking gun research is enough, especially when there's so much money involved. So in the political process in particular, you're seeing it play out in Tallahassee right now, SB 2508, which is a very, pro-sugar piece of legislation, against the best interest of the environment and Floridians as a whole. And, so it needs to be, a collective approach, but fundamentally when the public pressure is to a certain point, when it becomes, too unpalatable for politicians, despite all the money from the sugar industry they receive, to continue that course, that's when we're really going to get the progress that we need to make. So, it's got to be, you got to hit it from all angles. And the political, it's got to be a combination of the research with, the public pressure to ultimately create the political will we need. So we all need to work together.
So I see Tony is now
Brent,
unmuted. Sure.
Can I pick up on what Patrick was saying? Let me offer maybe a dissenting voice in this thing. I don't think the problem is information. More studies, more research, of course, it's always good. But this is the problem we have in Florida is not the lack of information. The problem we have in Florida is the lack of political clout and the entrenched interests who are keeping the status quo. Let me give you one clear example. This governor was elected a few years ago, and by claiming to be the champion of the environment. And one of the things that he did was recreate the Blue-Green Algae Task Force, which Governor Rick Scott allowed to go dormant. So he brought together probably 5 of the best scientists in the state of Florida and organized the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. They met for 2 years, they're still meeting, but after about a year or 18 months or so, they made recommendations to the legislature and the governor. And those recommendations were, look, we know what the source of blue-green algae is. It's a lot of things. It's key septic tanks, it's malfunctioning municipal sewage treatment plants, but the overwhelming cause of blue-green algae are nutrients into the water from runoff from farmlands. And so that went to the legislature, and it hit a brick wall of the lobbying impact of the Farm Bureau. So what we have in Florida is not a lack of information, there's a lack of political clout. I think people don't understand that the regulation system that we have in Florida, it's mostly a voluntary regulation system called best management practices. I don't remember the last time. In fact, there may never have been a time in the history of Florida where a significant agribusiness company was fined for polluting. It's voluntary compliance with best management practices. This is not a problem of the lack of information. It's a problem of the lack of political clout to change the regulation system so we get to something closer to polluters pay.
So on that note, I would ask,